Hi. Okay, so what I want to do is read from James Nestor's book. It's called Breath, the New Science of a Lost Art. And this book is so inspiring. If you read this book, you're going to be like changing your lifestyle habits, like left and right, because it just fills you with this energy that makes you want to do all these really great things. And what I'd like to do is read from chapter 4, which is titled The Exhale. And this is a chapter that I like to read to my intro course students in foundation training because it just illustrates the power of the breath so well and gets at a lot of the things that we actually do in foundation training. And so a little backstory, because we're starting in chapter 4. So we're sort of picking up in this moment where James and his friend Olson have just finished doing an experiment where they had plugs put up into their nostrils to prevent them from breathing through their nose. And they had a bunch of studies done while they kept those plugs in their nose because they wanted to see, is it important to breathe through your nose or through your mouth? And the study results were like, you gotta breathe through your nose. I mean, it's everything from like dental health to like immune system health to heart stuff to, it's actually impossible for me to list all of the consequences that come from just breathing through your mouth instead of your nose. But they've just had these plugs and they've just got them taken out and they're pumped because they were miserable. And so, story time. This is chapter 4 titled The Exhale. Every morning at 9:00 a.m., after Olson and I have finished our testing and split off for solo time, I roll out a mat on my living room floor and work on becoming a little more immortal. The path to everlasting life involves a lot of stretching, back bends, neck bends, and twirling. Each one a holy and ancient practice that has been passed down in secrecy from one Buddhist monk to another for over 2,500 years. Olson and I need this stretching. Even if we breathe through our nose 24 hours a day, it won't help much unless we've got the lung capacity to hold that air. Just a few minutes of daily bending and breathing can expand lung capacity. With that extra capacity, we can expand our lives. Okay, this is one of the things that foundation training does really well. It expands lung capacity. And I don't know any other practice that does it better. Okay. The stretches, called the 5 Tibetan rites, came to the Western world and to me by way of the writer Peter Kelder, who was known as a lover of books and libraries, words, and poetry. In the 1930s, Kelder was sitting on a park bench in Southern California when an elderly stranger struck up a conversation. The man whom he called Colonel Bradford had spent decades in India with the British Army. The colonel was all old, sloping shoulders, gray hair, wobbly legs, but he believed there was a cure for aging and that it was locked up in a monastery in the Himalayas. The usual mystical stuff occurred up there. The sick became healthy, the poor became rich, the old became young. And Kelder and the colonel stayed in touch and shared many conversations. And then one day, the old man hobbled away, desperate to find his Shangri-La before he drew his last breath. 4 years passed until Kelder received a call from his building's doorman. The colonel was waiting downstairs. He looked 20 years younger. He was standing straight, his face vibrant and alive, and his once balding head was covered in thick dark hair. He'd found the monastery, studied the ancient manuscripts, and learned restorative practices from the monks. He'd reversed aging through nothing more than stretching and breathing. I will say, with foundation training, when I get to work with people that are in their 70s, or even getting in their 80s, they look 10 years younger within weeks because of the adjustment in their posture and through the changes in what the breath can do for the whole body. Okay. Kelder described these techniques in a slim booklet titled The Eye of Revelation, which was published in 1939. Few people bothered to read it. Fewer believed it. Kelder's yarn was likely fabricated, or at minimum, grossly exaggerated. However, the lung expanding stretches he described are rooted in actual exercises that date back to 500 BCE. Tibetans had used these methods for millennia to improve physical fitness, mental health, cardiovascular function, and of course, extend life. I did do these Tibetan rites for a while. I did this for like a month or something. I started every single morning doing these Tibetan rites. Okay, so I know where they are if you're interested and you want to find out what the heck these are. Okay, more recently, science has begun measuring what the ancient Tibetans understood intuitively. In the 1980s, researchers with the Framingham study, a 70-year longitudinal research program focused on heart disease. They attempted to find out if lung size really did correlate to longevity. They gathered 2 decades of data from 5,200 subjects. They crunched the numbers and discovered that the greatest indicator of lifespan wasn't genetics, it wasn't diet, or the amount of daily exercise, as many had suspected. It was lung capacity. The smaller and less efficient lungs became, the quicker subjects got sick and died. The cause of deterioration didn't matter. Smaller meant shorter, but larger lungs meant longer lives. Larger lungs equaled longer lives. Our ability to breathe full breaths was, according to the researchers, literally a measure of living capacity. In 2000, University of Buffalo researchers actually ran a similar study, comparing lung capacity in a group of more than 1,000 subjects over 3 decades. The results were the same. What neither of these landmark studies addressed, however, was how a person with deteriorated lungs might heal and strengthen them. There were studies to remove diseased tissue, drugs to stem infections, but no advice on how to keep lungs large and healthy throughout life. All the way up to the 1980s, the common belief in Western medicine was that the lungs, like every other internal organ, were immutable. That is, whatever lungs we're born with, we're stuck with. As these organs degraded with age, the only thing we could do was sigh and bear it. Okay, aging was supposed to go like this. Just notice, this is how it was supposed to, and this was the common belief, and we don't believe this anymore. So as I read this, don't get too depressed. Okay. Aging was supposed to go like this. Starting around 30, we should expect to lose a little more memory, mobility, and muscle with every passing year. We would also lose the ability to breathe properly. Bones in the chest would become thinner and change shape, causing rib cages to collapse inward. It's that posture. So many of us look like that. Muscle fibers surrounding the lungs would weaken and prevent air from entering and exiting. So many of us think that our muscle of respiration is the diaphragm, but it does not work alone. You've got your intercostals, your lats, your pecs, the serratus, anterior, inferior, superior. Our shoulder muscles are literally our muscles of respiration, which is partly why things like frozen shoulder, carpal tunnel, issues that go down the sleeve of the arm are actually partly stemming from breathing issues. What other muscle can I think of that has to do with breathing? Oh, all the muscles along the spine. There's so many. I could show you. Not now. Okay, anyways. So bones in the chest would become thinner and change shape, causing rib cages to collapse inward. Muscle fibers surrounding the lungs would weaken and prevent air from entering and exiting. And all of these things would reduce lung capacity. The lungs themselves would lose about 12% of capacity from the age of 30 to 50 and would continue declining even faster as we got older, with women faring far worse than men. If we made it to 80, we'd be able to take in 30% less air than we did in our 20s, forced to breathe faster and harder. So when we breathe faster and harder, it leads to chronic problems like high blood pressure, immune disorders, and anxiety. And one of the things that we do with the foundation training practice is not only are we expanding the lung capacity, but we're slowing the inhalation and slowing the exhalation. And so that also changes our capacity to actually soak in the oxygen better. We get more oxygen out of each breath when we breathe slowly. Okay. But what the Tibetans have long known and what Western science is now discovering is that aging doesn't have to be a one-way path of decline. The internal organs are malleable and we can change them at nearly any time. I love this because the body adapts. Whatever input we give it, it adapts to make it easier and make it so that we can do that better, whatever we put in. And so this idea about aging being this like one-way street, it's really not true. Okay, free divers know this better than anyone. I learned it from them years ago when I met several people who'd increased their lung capacity by an astounding 30 to 40%. Herbert Nietzsche, a multiple world record holder, reportedly has a lung capacity of 14 liters. Just think about that, 14 liters. More than double that of the average male. Okay, so whenever I think about this, 14 liters, what I imagine is like 14 quart-sized jars inside of his chest. And I just imagine the size of torso and rib cage, rib basket to accommodate 14, quart-sized mason jars. So if you understand how that is measured, let me know. I've been really curious, what amount of space does a single liter take up? A single liter of breath. What amount of space does that take up? Okay. And is it literally what I'm thinking, or is it sort of different? Okay, anyways. Herbert Nietzsche has more than double the breath capacity of the average male. And neither Nietzsche nor any of the other freedivers started out like this. They made their lungs larger by force of will. They taught themselves how to breathe in ways that dramatically changed the internal organs of their bodies. Fortunately, diving down hundreds of feet is actually not required. Any regular practice that stretches the lungs and keeps them flexible can retain or increase lung capacity. Moderate exercise even does it, like walking or cycling has been shown to boost lung capacity size by up to 15%. All right, this is my favorite part coming here. These discoveries would have been welcome news to Katharina Schroff, a teenager who lived in Dresden, Germany. In the early 1900s, Schroff had been diagnosed with scoliosis, a sideways curvature of the spine. The condition had no cure, and most children who suffered from extreme cases like Schroff's could expect to spend a life in bed or rolling around in a wheelchair. Schroff had other thoughts about the human body's potential. She watched how balloons collapsed or expanded, pushing or pulling in whatever was around them. So the lungs being like balloons, when they expand, the whole structure expands, and when they empty, the whole structure follows that. So there's the expansion, everything moves open and out, and the emptying, it pulls the whole structure down with it. Okay. So when balloons collapse or expand, they push or pull whatever's around them in or out with them. The lungs, she felt, were no different. If she could expand her lungs, maybe she could also expand her skeletal structure. Maybe she could straighten her spine and improve the quality and the quantity of her life. At age 16, Shroff began training herself in something called orthopedic breathing. She would stand in front of a mirror, twist her body, inhale into one lung, while limiting air intake into the other. And then she'd hobble over to a table, sling her body on its side, and arch her chest back and forth to loosen her rib cage while breathing into the empty space. Shroff spent 5 years doing this. And at the end, she'd effectively cured herself of the incurable scoliosis. She'd breathed her spine into neutral curves, upright and expansive again. Shroff began teaching the power of breathing to other scoliosis patients. And by the 1940s, she was running a bustling institute in rural Western Germany. It had no hospital rooms or other standard medical equipment, just a few rundown buildings, a yard, a picket fence, and patio tables. 150 scoliosis patients would gather there at a time. They suffered from the most severe form of the disease, with spines curved more than 80 degrees. Okay, think about that for a moment. 90 degrees is a right angle. 80 degrees is slightly less than that. I actually, for a while, when my dog Obi, who passed a couple years ago, became paralyzed from something called Wobbler's disease, I was working with a veterinarian who was wonderful, who had very severe scoliosis. When working with him, some days were worse than the other, but he would often be bent like this. And so I would have to get down to be able to talk to him, because he'd lift his head like this and I could talk to him like, so I would kind of get down on my knees in order to talk to him. So he had a version of that. Like he was bent all the way. Okay. So many of the people that came to Katerina Shroff's place and to learn from her were bent with like 80 degrees. Many were so hunched over and their backs so twisted and turned, they couldn't walk or even look upward. I mean, if you're at that night, it's like you have to, it's hard. Okay. Many were so hunched over, their backs are so twisted and turned, they couldn't walk, they couldn't look upward. Their disfigured ribs and chests made it hard for them to take a breath. And they likely suffered from respiratory problems, fatigue, and heart conditions because of it. I mean, also, the heart is in here. And so if the chest is collapsing around it and compressing, like organs need space in order to thrive. And having the chest hold itself expansively gives the heart and the blood vessels that come out of it that, extend through the rest of our body and into our lungs, the space they need to work really well. Hospitals had given up on trying to heal these patients, and so they came to live with and work with Shroff for 6 weeks. The German medical community derided Shroff. They claimed that she was neither a professional trainer nor a physician, and that she was not qualified to treat patients. And she ignored them all, and she kept doing things her way. Yes! I love this about her. This is so moving to me that she's being derided by all the experts and all the authority figures. But she had gone through an experience, and so she knew that she could trust what she was sharing because she had literally been through it. And so she stayed with that knowing, even in the face of criticism and experts and authority figures saying no. She ignored them all. She kept doing things her way, having the women stripped down bare-chested in a dirt lot beneath the copse of beech trees, stretching and breathing themselves back to health. Within a few weeks, see, this is the thing, it can happen within a few weeks. Hunched backs straightened. Many students gained inches in height. Women who had been bedridden and hopeless finally began to walk again. They could take full breaths again. Schroth spent the next 60 years bringing her techniques to hospitals throughout Germany and beyond. Toward the end of her life, the medical community had changed its tune. And the German government awarded Schroth the Federal Cross of Merit for her contributions to medicine. So moving. So this is a lot of what foundation training does. I mean, this is it's different. Do it differently than what Katharina Schroth did. But it's there's a huge component of using the breath to open up the structure, but also learning how to use the structure to open up the breath. All right, this is a quote that I just love. What the bodily form depends on is breath. And what breath relies upon is form. I'm going to read that again because it's like the yin yang. It's, that the form depends upon the breath. Like the form is lost without that breath, but the breath depends upon the form. Like the form must hold itself expansively in order for the breath to be able to move through. So what the bodily form depends upon is breath. And what breath relies upon is form. States a Chinese adage from 700 AD. Now this is my second favorite part. When the breath is perfect, the form is perfect too. I think it's very beautiful to make shapes with our body that are about increasing the space for our lungs, not about being something iconic or special or achievement or performative, but to make a shape that is being informed by our sense of our breath capacity, which is unique to the individual. Schroth continued to expand her lungs and improve her own breathing and form throughout her life. This former scoliosis patient who, as a teenager, had been left to wither in bed, would die in 1985, just 3 days shy of her 91st birthday. One more thing, because it's coming to me just now. I mean, there's so much, when we get going about the breath, it's just so inspiring. And I think that is the nature of breath, is very inspiring. But, back to this sort of idea about, what our culture and Western medicine really believed about our aging process. Like, starting at 30 years old, that, our lungs and every organ in our body would start to decline, and that would really lead to all these systemic issues. Just speaking about the lungs, there's this beautiful demonstration by B.K.S. Iyengar where he's standing on stage and he's demonstrating the inhalation and the exhalation. And I believe he's either in his 70s or 80s at the time of this. So he's standing on some stage in an auditorium. There's this huge audience. And he's like, this is the inhalation. And he comes close to the microphone so you can hear the sound of his breath. And then he goes on to inhale for like 60 seconds straight. And it's just like it's going on and on and on and on and on. And then he steps back and he goes, that is the inhalation. And the crowd goes wild. They're like, whoa! And then he, after receiving this like full encore, this like standing ovation, he steps back up to the mic and he said, now I will demonstrate the exhalation. And so he takes a big breath in and then just slowly starts to exhale, and you can just hear the sound of the exhalation in the mic. And he goes on to exhale for like 60 seconds straight as well. And so, and then when he finishes, he says, he steps back, he says, that is the exhalation. And the crowd goes wild again, it's really amazing to see, the breath capacity. And something that you can see when looking at B.K.S. Iyengar is just the enormous chest that he has. And so you can see that his chest did not collapse as he aged, but it actually was very expansive. Okay, I'll end there.